dry, warm room, safety, award-winning comedy. Award-winning stand-up comedy out the room. Award-winning stand-up comedy.
For a comedian, the Edinburgh Fringe is the perfect place to try out new material. It turns out for a politician, less so.
I thought your official policy was that you would not allow a second Scottish referendum. You're saying if the Scottish Parliament wants one, then
what
you would
Jeremy
allow
said
one.
is obviously we'll consider that at the time.
We'll
but
consider
we wouldn't block something like that. We'd let the Scottish people decide. That's democracy. There's other views within the party, but that's our view.
In fact, there were quite a few people in the Labour Party who didn't find it that funny.
John McDonnell is not a stupid man, but his comments yesterday were strikingly ignorant.
We are opposed, and I am opposed, to a rerun of a second referendum on independence.
Why John McDonnell has crossed the border to go to the Edinburgh Festival Fringe to change a massive constitutional policy on the hoof is completely beyond me. Even referred to an English Parliament of all things, something that doesn't even exist.
A recent poll found that if a Scottish referendum were held now, it would be a close-run thing. Ultimately, though, if a meaningful referendum is to take place, it has to have the backing of the British government. Until now, the Tories and Labour had ruled it out.
This is John McDonnell doing something on the hoof, saying something off the cuff at a comedy club in the Fringe.
Well, he's the Shadow Chancellor.
It's not the way to make policy in the Labour Party.
Today, an attempt from the Shadow Chancellor to clarify his position. But he refused to say that Labour would block a second referendum.
I'm not being set up by Nicola Sturgeon, because that's what she's trying to do. She's trying to say, it's the big bad English yet again, trying to prevent us having a referendum. No, we're not. What we're saying is it's unnecessary. We'll campaign against having a referendum, but we're not using parliamentary devices to block it. It's as simple as that.
His political opponents were quick to jump on his comments, saying that Labour were now a threat to the Union.
They told the people of Scotland, they've gone into election after election saying that they believe in the United Kingdom and they'll stand up for it. And then we've got one of the two chiefs from the Labour Party down south cutting Richard Leonard, the Scottish Labour leader, off at the knees and saying that he's quite happy to pick up the phone and do some form of deal with Nicola Sturgeon. And I think there's going to be Labour voters across Scotland that will feel utterly betrayed by that.
The really galling thing for Labour MPs in Scotland is that it was the Brexit referendum that really breathed new life into the independence debate here, a referendum that they never wanted. But now this intervention allows the Conservative Party to accuse Labour of playing politics with the Union.
More taxes.
More taxes.
And if Labour need any reminding of how dangerous showing a bit of leg to the SNP can be, you only need to go back 4 years. Remember those attack ads against Ed Miliband? Many around Mr Miliband believed it was these adverts that sunk his campaign. Labour, though, are playing the numbers game. If they're to become a party of government, they may well have to rely on SNP votes. So what do they want?
We'll have to see what happens after the election, but as I say, we would want an alternative to the current extreme right-wing government that is governing the UK. We would want to support an alternative which will prevent Brexit, give people another choice on that, and which will respect the decisions of the Scottish Parliament, particularly if they wish to consult Scottish people on how they should be governed in the future.
It's not totally clear if this was a bit of improv from John McDonnell or a carefully thought-out announcement. But for their critics, this is another judgment call on a referendum that the Labour leadership have got wrong.
Joining me now is Ian Murray, Labour MP for Edinburgh South. Good evening.
Good evening.
Why has John McDonnell done this?
Well, that's a question I think John McDonnell has to answer himself. He's come across the border to the Edinburgh Fringe Festival to do two in conversation with events at the Fringe Festival in the last 2 days and come up with a new policy on one of the biggest constitutional issues that the country ever faces. So I'm not quite sure why he's come up with that new policy. It's quite clear that the policy of the UK and Scottish Labour Party is no to a second independent referendum. That has been clear and been reiterated by Richard Leonard, the Scottish leader, time and time again, both today and in the months leading up to today.
But John McDonnell doesn't seem to have any care for that. I ask you the question why, because it seems patently obvious to anyone who's trying to get into government that they can't rely on Scottish Labour MPs. There's 7 of you. The European elections, Scottish Labour only got 9% of the vote. You can't rely on you guys, can he, to get into Westminster to get him into government, but it can on the SNP.
Well, let's be quite clear about this, because this is about parliamentary mathematics, and Tommy Shepherd at the end of your clip there talked about doing deals, but never tells us what the deals are. So let's be quite clear about this. If there was a minority Labour administration as the largest party, but not with a majority after the next general election, are the SNP really going to vote with the Conservatives like they did in 1979 to bring down a Labour government? Or is there an anti-Conservative majority in the House of Commons that would allow a minority Labour government to govern, get a Queen's speech through and a budget through without the SNP? Of course there is. The SNP will not bring down a Labour government, and therefore you don't need to do a deal.
But
it's quite clearly parliamentary mathematics.
He obviously wants to bet the House towards the SNP. That's why he's done this. He's now actually said it twice. It wasn't off the hoof. He also confirmed that Jeremy Corbyn is of the same view. He's written you guys off in Scotland and Scottish Labour.
Well, he's getting the analysis completely wrong then. As your clip already showed, in 2015, the threat in England of the SNP anywhere near Downing Street cost Labour many seats right across England because people were fearful of that nationalist element from Scotland.
This is your party.
And indeed, John McDonnell has said today, again, about not having any deals with the SNP, but if they are going down this route, they've got the mathematics wrong, because they do not need the SNP to support any kind of minority Labour administration after the next general election, because the SNP, in not supporting it, would have to bring down a Labour government and install another Conservative government. Tommy Shepherd said that's not what he would want.
You're playing an old game of poker here, aren't you? Everything's changed because not only of the referendum, but in terms of the Brexit referendum, but also because of Boris Johnson now and the view of him in Scotland, and also what's happened with the likelihood of no deal. John McDonnell's just outplayed you at a game of poker, and you've been left behind looking completely out of the picture.
Well, I think he's improvised at the Edinburgh Festival, and he might win the Perrier Award for improvisation at this particular festival.
Calculated. He reset it today.
You heard from Ruth Davidson there in the piece as well, when she said that Labour have gone weak on the union. Well, that's not the case, because it is still our party policy and remains to be our party policy of having no to a second independence referendum. The reason we're in this particular discussion is because of Brexit.
He's opened the door to it.
But why would he even open that door? Opening that door is unnecessary.
You're in his party. This isn't a good look, is it, to the electorate? In all seriousness, people who support Labour don't want to see a Labour Party at war like this, and this is what's happening.
Well, John McDonnell's on his own here, because all the MSPs, parliamentary candidates for the Labour Party, have written a letter tonight. The leader of the Scottish Labour Party, myself and my MP colleagues have all come together tonight to say that John McDonnell is completely wrong, and he has to come out, clarify what he said, and say that the policy that is in our 2017 manifesto is still clear, that we're against a second... Well,
what are you going to do?
The policy of the Labour Party, as we sit here tonight on this television programme, is no to a second independence referendum. Now, if John McDonnell wants to change that policy, and Jeremy Corbyn wants to change that policy, they have to go through the proper channels to do so. And I have to say they'll get short shrift from Scottish Labour Party members if they try and change that policy. We have to learn the lessons of the 2014 referendum and the 2015 general election. We learnt them in 16, we learnt them in 17. If John McDonnell is rowing back on that now, perhaps I'll send him a calculator so he can look at the parliamentary mathematics and see that no deals with any other party required to be done to support a minority Labour administration.
Well, maybe that's your next move, not just a letter, a calculator. Ian Murray, thank you.